I want to tell you why God wants to talk to you. His goal is friendship. His goal is friendship. In fact, let me say it this way. The key to hearing God's voice is not a formula, it's a friendship. It's funny when you start doing this series, people go, well, man, you must have this amazing ability. And we talked about it last week. It's not about an ability, it's about an identity, like I'm a sheep. And there's a relationship between me and the shepherd. And so why wouldn't I hear the shepherd's voice? But this idea is this: we spend a lot of time trying to find a formula to hear God speak. And he says it's not a formula, it's a friendship. Get to know me. Let's hang out. Let's spend some time together. Let's talk more often. And let's just not pick up the phone and you do all the talking. Why don't you put down the receiver and let me talk back? Some of you go, does God want to do that? Yeah, because his goal is friendship. He wants to have a friendship with you and with me. Look at John 15:15. Here's how I know this. Jesus said this to his followers. He says, I no longer call you servants because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. Jesus himself said, this is my motive. I want a friendship with you. Look at what it says about Moses in Exodus 33:11. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. Here's what's crazy about that. Do you realize that God never intended for Moses to be the only one to hear his voice and speak to him face to face? He actually invited his people to come up the mountain. They got afraid of God's voice, and they said, here's what they said: Moses, you go hear from God and come tell us what he says. You know what Moses got out of that deal? He got to speak to Jesus and the Father face to face as a friend. Man. James 4:23 says this, and the scriptures was fulfilled that says Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness, and he was called God's friend. You know what God wants? He wants friendship. He wants to bring you back to the place that he had with humanity back in a garden and reignite a conversation that you and I were destined for. He wants you to hear his voice and live by his voice. In fact, here's the thing I want to say to you. When you start hearing God's voice through the filter of a friendship, you know what happens? Friendship removes fear. If I'm truly friends with someone and I'm in relationship with them, I never fear their phone call. I'm excited. Hey, look who's calling. I can't wait to talk to him. Friendship removes fear. And here's the struggle we have. Did you know that as a child of God, you were created to hear your Father's voice? My dad was an amazing man. When my dad spoke, he spoke so gently and so loving. I know many of you didn't grow up with a great father. My dad had his struggles too, but I want to tell you, the one thing I valued is when my dad spoke, I heard his voice, and here's what I knew. I was his son. Did you know that God created you to never fear the Father's voice? Why? Because if you have a personal relationship, you're a son and you're a daughter. And there ought to be something in you that doesn't fear that anymore, but in a sense craves that. I want to go hear what my dad says. Hey, did you know my dad said this? How do you know that? Because I'm a son. It removes all the fear from having a friendship with God, because I no longer think of myself as a slave to a master, but I think of myself as a son to a father. And I was created that way, to hear God's voice. And so were you, because you're a son and you're a daughter. That's what you are.